The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thickening the air with a sense of unease that settled heavily on everyone present as the latest session of the Hillary Gardi murder trial commenced. What was intended to be a routine continuation of a case that had already stretched across months, exhausting the emotional reserves of all involved, rapidly descended into disorder. The disruption arrived suddenly and unexpectedly, even by the standards of a courtroom accustomed to high-profile cases with their inherent pressures and complexities. The disturbance was significant enough to visibly unsettle the composure of the presiding judge, Linda Vukia, on Monday morning at the Mpumalanga Division of the High Court. The accused in the case, Labiwa Rasikuna, shocked the court by abruptly dismissing his legal aid lawyer. The announcement came without warning, catching the defense team, the prosecution, and the assembled courtroom observers completely off guard, adding yet another layer of complexity to a trial already mired in procedural delays and repeated interruptions. The day had been carefully earmarked for ongoing testimony and a steady progression through pre-planned procedures designed to move the case forward. However, in South Africa's already overburdened and resource-strained justice system, abrupt interruptions are hardly unprecedented occurrences. Still, what unfolded on this particular morning was more than a minor procedural hiccup. It was a full-scale disruption that threatened to derail the carefully maintained rhythm of the trial and undermine months of meticulous preparation. Standing before Judge Vukia, Kuna made his decision unmistakably clear. He had lost confidence in his lawyer, Advocate Mr. Kiki. Kiki himself was obliged to inform the court of this development, his visible discomfort evident as he addressed the bench with measured words. "My lady, the accused says he wants a new lawyer because he no longer has trust in me and has asked for me to recuse myself." The words carried immediate weight, instantly capturing the attention of everyone in the courtroom and introducing an element of uncertainty into proceedings that had seemed on track. Judge Vukia's face hardened perceptibly, her irritation evident as she sought a comprehensive explanation for why such a critical issue had been raised after months of preparation, witness scheduling, and procedural groundwork. Kuna's response was deliberately restrained, almost clinical in its detachment from the emotional gravity of the situation. He claimed an ongoing conflict of interest with his attorney, but declined to elaborate further, offering no specifics to substantiate his decision or provide the court with tangible grounds for his request. For those who had followed the case closely from its inception, this vagueness was all too familiar, forming part of a recognizable pattern. Since his arrest, Kuna has repeatedly disrupted proceedings through last-minute complaints, procedural objections, and sudden requests that emerge at critical junctures, creating repeated pauses in a case that otherwise seemed to be advancing steadily toward resolution. In the eyes of many seasoned court observers, this latest move appeared to be another calculated effort to stall the trial's progress, to delay the inevitable confrontation with damning evidence and compelling testimony from witnesses who had waited months to speak. Judge Vukia pressed further, asking directly what Kuna intended to do if she allowed the removal of Advocate Kiki. Without hesitation or apparent consideration of the consequences, Kuna stated he would request another lawyer through the legal aid system. While this may have sounded like a straightforward and reasonable request on its surface, it carried serious and far-reaching implications for the trial's timeline. A new lawyer would require extensive briefings, comprehensive access to all case files accumulated over months of investigation, and substantial time to become familiar with the intricate details of the evidence, witness statements, and legal strategies already developed. This process could easily add weeks, if not months, of delay to a court system already operating under significant strain and facing substantial backlogs. Such disruptions were far from trivial administrative matters. The judge turned to Advocate Kiki, inquiring whether legal aid had a replacement lawyer ready to step in immediately to minimize the disruption. Kiki admitted candidly that he did not know, noting that any new assignment would be entirely contingent on the availability of qualified personnel at the legal aid office, which itself faces chronic resource constraints and overwhelming caseloads. Before the court could fully process this development and explore potential solutions, Kuna introduced yet another unexpected obstacle that further complicated the proceedings. He objected to the interpreter assigned to him, claiming that the interpreter did not speak a form of Sepedi he could adequately understand. Kuna demanded a new interpreter fluent in his specific dialect, adding another layer of administrative complexity to an already troubled session. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, with attendees exchanging bewildered glances. Even Judge Vukia, an experienced jurist accustomed to courtroom dramatics and procedural challenges, seemed momentarily taken aback by the sudden escalation of administrative issues emerging simultaneously. The compound nature of these objections, both lawyer and interpreter challenged in rapid succession, created the appearance of a coordinated strategy to obstruct progress. In response to this unprecedented dual disruption, the judge temporarily adjourned the proceedings, instructing Kiki to contact legal aid immediately and requesting that the interpreter's office secure someone who could meet Kuna's specific language requirements without further delay. Yet when the court reconvened later that same day, following hours of administrative scrambling and consultations, the fundamental issues remained stubbornly unresolved. No replacement lawyer had been confirmed or assigned to the case, no interpreter meeting Kuna's specifications had been located and made available, and consequently, no meaningful progress could be made on the substantive matters before the court. Judge Vukia, facing the reality of an insurmountable administrative impasse, had no choice but to postpone the matter until Friday to allow the necessary administrative arrangements to be completed. This decision, while procedurally sound, inevitably added to the growing frustration and disillusionment surrounding the trial among family members, legal observers, and the broader public following the case. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high as news of the postponement spread. Supporters of the Gadi family, along with political figures who had been closely following the proceedings and advocating for swift justice, expressed outrage at what they perceived as transparent manipulation of the judicial system. Collins Chaubain, the leader of the economic freedom fighters in Mpumalanga, voiced a sentiment widely shared among observers and activists. The accused, he argued forcefully, was deliberately attempting to delay justice through calculated procedural obstruction. Chaubain highlighted the dual complaints, the dismissal of the lawyer and the objection to the interpreter, as transparent attempts to slow the case and frustrate the judicial process. Still, despite his sharp criticisms of the disruptions, Chaubain remained publicly confident that justice would eventually prevail, even if the process had been repeatedly obstructed and compromised by these tactical delays. To fully grasp the intensity of public feeling surrounding this case, it is necessary to revisit the tragic circumstances that sparked this protracted legal battle and captured national attention. In April 2022, South Africa was stunned and horrified by the disappearance of Hilary Gadi, a 28-year-old woman whose promising life ended in a manner that shocked the nation and galvanized public opinion. Her body was discovered near Mbombela, partially unclothed, bearing the unmistakable marks of violent assault and fatally wounded by gunfire. The brutal and degrading nature of her death triggered immediate national outrage, not only because of the political prominence of her family within Mpumalanga and ANC circles, but also because her murder underscored a stark and uncomfortable reality that many South Africans live with daily. Violent crime in this country can strike indiscriminately, leaving no one safe regardless of their social status, connections, or precautions. The case became emblematic of the broader systemic challenges facing law enforcement and the judiciary in a country struggling with persistently high levels of violent crime, gender-based violence, and inadequate resources to address these interconnected crises effectively. Kuna was arrested after a brief but intense manhunt that mobilized significant police resources, and he was charged with multiple serious offenses: murder, kidnapping, rape, and the unlawful possession of a firearm. Investigators uncovered chilling indications that Hilary might not have been his only victim, revealing a pattern of violence that extended beyond this single tragic case. Police investigators connected him to additional murders, including the death of his girlfriend, Judu Langu, just weeks before Hilary's murder, suggesting a disturbing pattern of intimate partner violence escalating to lethal consequences. Authorities described him as a serial offender operating across both Mpumalanga and Limpopo provinces, leaving a trail of devastation, broken families, and unresolved trauma across multiple communities. For the Gadi family, initially there was a sense of grim inevitability and cautious hope. Justice seemed within reach after the arrest and the compilation of what prosecutors described as compelling evidence. Yet the courtroom has proven to be a far more complex and frustrating arena than the initial investigation suggested, transforming what appeared to be a straightforward prosecution into a prolonged ordeal. Throughout the trial proceedings, Kuna's conduct has been a source of constant disruption and tactical obstruction. He has challenged who should represent him legally, disputed the qualifications and suitability of interpreters assigned to facilitate his understanding, and raised procedural objections at critical junctures when the trial appeared poised to advance. While it is not uncommon or inappropriate for defendants to express legitimate concerns about their legal representation or to ensure their rights are protected, Kuna's interventions consistently occur at moments when the trial appears ready to make substantive progress, suggesting a pattern rather than isolated incidents of genuine concern. The dismissal of Advocate Kiki after months of careful preparation and planning illustrates this pattern with striking clarity, halting the hard-won momentum of the case in a single calculated move that reset the clock on progress. Judge Vukia's visible frustration during these proceedings is entirely understandable given the context. Across South Africa, courts have faced similar scenarios repeatedly in high-profile cases that capture public attention and media scrutiny. The pattern has become depressingly familiar. A crime shocks the nation and dominates headlines, the suspect is apprehended amid public celebration, calls for swift justice mount from community members and activists, and then procedural delays begin to accumulate like sediment, slowly bearing the initial momentum. Postponements become frequent occurrences rather than exceptions, lawyers withdraw citing various reasons, administrative obstacles multiply seemingly without end, witnesses wait for extended periods often at personal inconvenience and emotional cost, and public confidence in the judicial process gradually erodes as frustration replaces hope. Mpumalanga in particular has witnessed numerous cases where such delays have prolonged the delivery of justice and undermined public faith in legal institutions, and the Gadi case appears to be following the same unfortunate and all too familiar trajectory that has characterized other prominent prosecutions in the province. Legal experts observing the case have warned that continued disruptions could eventually force Judge Vukia to take stronger and more decisive measures to protect the integrity of the proceedings. While she must conscientiously safeguard the constitutional rights of the accused, ensuring he receives fair treatment and adequate representation, she also has an equally important duty to prevent deliberate interference with court proceedings and to ensure that justice is not indefinitely delayed through tactical manipulation. Should Kuna persist in using procedural complaints as weapons to slow the trial's progress and frustrate its resolution, the court may compel legal aid to assign a new attorney without further delay or accommodation, or potentially initiate a formal inquiry into whether the disruptions constitute intentional and malicious manipulation of the judicial process that could warrant sanctions or other remedial action. Amid all of this procedural wrangling, strategic maneuvering, and administrative complication, the human cost remains acute and undeniable. Each postponement further delays justice for Hilary Gadi's grieving family, extending their ordeal and postponing the closure they desperately seek. Godrich Gadi, Hilary's father and a prominent political figure in his own right, has publicly expressed his profound frustration with the process, criticizing the sluggish pace of the case and accusing parts of the state apparatus of perpetuating delays through bureaucratic inertia, inadequate resources, and insufficient prioritization of the case despite its high profile and public interest. Courtroom interruptions and administrative obstacles shift attention away from the crucial evidence and compelling testimony that should form the heart of the trial, redirecting focus instead toward procedural technicalities and administrative minutiae, leaving the family trapped in a dispiriting cycle of anticipation followed by disappointment. The emotional toll of such repeated delays is immense and cannot be overstated, compounding the grief of a family that has already endured a horrific loss and transforming their quest for justice into an exhausting marathon of patience and perseverance. As the day drew to a close and the courtroom gradually emptied, with journalists filing their reports and family members departing with heavy hearts, a pervasive sense of disillusionment lingered in the air. A man accused of multiple murders, connected to a pattern of violence against women, had once again managed to control the proceedings and dictate the pace of justice through technical complaints and procedural objections, leaving justice deferred yet again. For Hillary's loved ones, these delays represent far more than mere inconvenience or bureaucratic frustration. They constitute a continued injustice, a postponement of the closure and accountability they need to begin healing in the face of unspeakable tragedy and loss. Kuna is expected to return to court on Friday, when the administrative issues are theoretically supposed to be resolved, but uncertainty hangs heavily over the next session like a dark cloud. Will a new lawyer be available and adequately prepared? Will an acceptable interpreter be found? Or will new obstacles emerge to further delay proceedings? Observers across the nation watch closely, acutely aware of the painful truth that justice delayed often becomes justice denied, and that every postponement risks witnesses forgetting crucial details, evidence becoming stale, and public attention drifting to newer scandals and tragedies. For a young woman whose life was taken in such a violent and senseless way, whose potential and promise were extinguished by criminal violence, every postponement deepens the sense of loss and frustration that her family must endure. The case has become a stark illustration of the challenges facing South Africa's criminal justice system, the tension between protecting defendants' rights and preventing their abuse, the resource constraints that make administrative disruptions particularly damaging, and the emotional toll on victims' families who must navigate a process that often seems designed to test their endurance rather than deliver justice. The broader implications extend beyond this single case, however heartbreaking. The Gadi trial has become a symbol of the systemic weaknesses that allow determined defendants to weaponize procedural rights, transforming protections designed to ensure fairness into tools of obstruction. It highlights the urgent need for reforms that preserve defendants' fundamental rights while preventing their cynical manipulation to delay accountability indefinitely. Until such reforms are implemented, families like the Gadis will continue to endure the agonizing wait for justice, watching as months stretch into years and hope gradually gives way to resignation. The question that haunts this case, as it haunts so many others, remains unanswered: when will justice finally be served?